Hi everyone, welcome back to * Marriage is not the end. Today's story might feel a little familiar, and maybe even a little satisfying, to many women who are going through a rough patch in their marriage or have just walked away from a bad relationship. This is a story about being a stand-in. A story about how a woman, after being used like a tool, turns around with grace, and flips the entire chessboard. The story begins outside a luxury postpartum recovery center in Los Angeles. Our female lead is named Sophie. She has just finished 6 weeks of postpartum care. In her arms is her baby boy, just over a month old, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the storm that's about to break outside. The person who came to pick her up is her husband, Andrew. Andrew is standing beside a black Porsche. His suit is perfectly pressed, his hair neatly set with gel. The expression on his face, well, it's calm. So calm that it looks less like he's here to pick up the wife who just gave birth to his child and more like he's picking up a colleague after work. In his hand is a box, a red velvet cake from Sophie's favorite bakery. When Sophie sees the cake, her heart skips. Not from being touched, from being alert. After 4 years of marriage, she knows Andrew too well. This man only acts this attentive in 2 situations, when he needs her to solve a technical problem for him, or when he feels guilty about something. She guessed right. The car doesn't drive back to their marital home in Palo Alto. Instead, it stops downstairs at the small apartment Sophie bought before they got married. At that moment, Sophie understands everything. She doesn't say a word. Holding the baby, she steps out of the car. Andrew takes her luggage from the trunk, then reaches into the inside pocket of his suit and pulls out a brown document envelope. "Sophie," he says in the same steady tone, like he's announcing a decision at a meeting, "sign this." Sophie takes the envelope and pulls out the documents inside. The first page has bold black letters across the top, divorce agreement. The sunlight is bright, shining on the paper so strongly that it almost hurts to look at. But Sophie doesn't feel dazzled by the light. She only feels cold. The kind of cold that seeps out from between your bones, the cold of something you already knew was coming. Andrew looks at her. There's no guilt in his eyes, only a sense of relief. "Lily is coming back to the U.S. next week," he says. "It's time for us to end this." Lily. Again, Lily. Lily is Andrew's college classmate, and the love he never got over. The one he calls his white moonlight and red cinnabar mark. The woman he could never have, or at least hasn't had yet. In Andrew's stories, Lily is perfect, gentle, kind, refined. The only reason they didn't end up together back then was because their families didn't approve. Sophie knew all of this from the beginning. But she had been too young and too confident. She believed that 4 years of building a life together, starting a company side by side, going through hardships together, would eventually replace that distant illusion. She was wrong. A shadow is always just a shadow. And real people can be sacrificed. Sophie lowers her head and begins reading the terms of the agreement. Her eyes move line by line. When she reaches the clause that says, all ownership and shares of the company will belong to the husband, Andrew. All other marital assets will belong to the wife, Sophie, and their child. Her fingertips tremble slightly. Sounds generous, doesn't it? The house, the savings, the cars, all hers. Andrew only keeps the company. To outsiders, it might even look like he has a bit of conscience left, not kicking his postpartum wife out with nothing. But inside, Sophie is coldly amused. Because she knows that most of their liquid assets, stocks, funds, cash, had already been transferred over the past 6 months to accounts under Andrew's mother and cousins' names. And that so-called marital home? 2 months ago, he secretly took out a second mortgage on it. What he's leaving her is nothing more than a pile of debt, and the old apartment she bought before the marriage, which he hadn't managed to scheme away. His so-called generosity is just the scraps he tossed her after emptying his pockets. A wave of icy sarcasm rises in Sophie's chest, but none of it shows on her face. She frowns slightly and says in a carefully measured, wounded tone, "Andrew, we built that company together. The code, the clients, all those nights working overtime, have you forgotten?" Andrew's gaze flickers for a moment, but quickly steadies again. "The company was always meant for Lily," he says. "It was her dream. I have to protect it for her. Protect it for her." Sophie repeats those words silently in her mind. What a grand love story. She says nothing more. She takes the pen from his hand and signs her name neatly and decisively on the line for Party B. The pen scratches softly across the paper. Andrew pauses, clearly surprised she agreed so easily. "For years of marriage," he says, unable to stop himself from asking, "and you don't feel even a little reluctant?" Sophie looks up at him. This man, she had loved him, hated him, once believed they would grow old together. But now, looking at him, he only feels like a stranger. A ridiculous one. She glances down at the sleeping baby in her arms. The little boy has no idea what's happening. Then she lifts her head again and smiles at Andrew. It's a calm, gentle smile, without a trace of resentment. I wish you and Lily, she says slowly, word by word, a lifetime of happiness. Then she stops looking at him, bends down to grab her luggage, and walks straight into the apartment building with the baby in her arms. Andrew stands there, holding the freshly signed divorce papers, watching her slender figure disappear into the hallway. For the first time, a strange feeling rises in his chest. Did he just lose something? Sophie returns to the apartment, closes the door, and leans against it, letting out a long breath. The apartment is small, just one bedroom and a living room. Her father had insisted on buying it for her years ago, saying a girl should always have a place of her own. Back then, she thought he was being overly cautious. Now she realizes just how wise he had been. She places the baby on the bed in the bedroom. The little boy rolls over slightly and keeps sleeping. Looking at his face, so much like Andrew's, Sophie feels a sharp pang in her chest. But she quickly pushes the feeling down. For her son's sake, she has to stay strong. The doorbell rings. Through the peephole, she sees Hannah's anxious and furious face. Hannah was Sophie's college roommate and is still her best friend. Now she's a practicing lawyer at a law firm in Silicon Valley. The moment the door opens, Hannah rushes in and wraps her in a tight hug. That bastard. He actually dared to do this. Hannah's voice trembles with anger. When I heard about it, I couldn't believe it. You just had a baby. Is he even human? Sophie pats her back gently. It's okay. I'm okay. Okay? Hannah pulls away and looks her up and down. Seeing Sophie's pale face, her eyes redden. What do you mean okay? Tell me exactly how he split the assets. Sophie briefly explains the terms of the divorce agreement. After hearing it, Hannah lets out a cold laugh. She pulls a tablet from her bag, opens several documents, and hands it to Sophie. Look at this. Sophie takes it. On the screen are screenshots of bank statements and asset transfer records. They clearly show that over the past 6 months, Andrew had transferred large sums of money out of their joint account in multiple transactions. 2 properties they had invested in together after marriage have already had their ownership transferred as well. This was planned, Hannah says through clenched teeth. He was afraid you'd take his money. If you hadn't had that apartment from before the marriage, you'd have been completely kicked out with nothing. Looking at the evidence, Sophie feels like her heart has been dropped into icy water. She had already suspected Andrew had been moving assets behind her back, but seeing the black and white proof still chills her. Sophie, don't be upset, Hannah says, squeezing her hand. With this evidence, we can sue him for hiding marital assets and make him walk away with nothing. Sophie stays silent for a moment. Then she slowly shakes her head. Filing a lawsuit would take too long, she said. And even if I got the money back, it would just be a moment of satisfaction. What Andrew truly cares about has never been money. Hannah froze. Then what is it? Sophie didn't answer right away. She stood up, walked over to her suitcase, and pulled out a small, ordinary-looking black USB drive from a hidden compartment. She placed it on the coffee table in front of Hannah. What is this? Hannah asked, frowning at it. Andrew thinks that since he took the company, everything's settled, Sophie said, a cold curve forming at the corner of her lips. But he forgot, or maybe he never wanted to admit, that the original data for CloudMap Tech's core patents, the source code for the key algorithms, and even the backup records of those shady financial books he had accounting cook-up to secure early funding, are all in here. Hannah sucked in a sharp breath and stared at Sophie in shock. When did you? From the moment he started subtly pushing me out of core meetings, Sophie said quietly, but firmly. I'm not stupid, Hannah. For years of marriage didn't teach me much, but it did teach me one thing, never show someone all your cards. At that moment, the look in Hannah's eyes changed, from worry to amazement. She finally smacked Sophie lightly on the shoulder. Sophie, you're unbelievable. I was worried you'd fall apart, but you've been digging the trap this whole time. She grabbed the USB drive excitedly, holding it like treasure. With this, Andrew's basically a grasshopper after autumn, he won't be jumping around for long. But Sophie slowly shook her head. Taking him down isn't my goal, she said. Her gaze drifted toward the bedroom, where the baby slept peacefully, and her voice softened. I want to start over. I want to build a company that truly belongs to me, clean, honest, and mine alone. I want Andrew to watch me succeed and realize that without him, without some so-called dream of Lily's, Sophie, can still fly higher than he ever imagined. Hannah stared at her for a moment, then her eyes lit up even brighter. Yes. That's the spirit. Build your own empire and drive those two pieces of trash crazy. What do you need me to do? Help me find someone, Sophie said. Do you remember Charlie? Charlie was one of CloudMap Tech's founding engineers. Back in the early days, he'd stayed up all night coding alongside Sophie. He was brilliant and straightforward, but Andrew never liked him. The reason was simple. Charlie listened to Sophie, not Andrew. Hannah's eyes lit up. Of course I remember. I heard he's been pretty miserable at the company lately. Andrew brought in some so-called star from outside to be the new CTO and pushed Charlie to the sidelines. Sophie nodded and pulled out her phone, scrolling until she found Charlie's number. Charlie responded even faster than she expected. Less than 10 minutes after she sent a simple text, *, how have you been lately? *, her phone rang. President Sue. His voice was full of excitement, almost stumbling over itself. It's really you. When I saw your message I thought I must have read it wrong. Are you okay? How's the baby? Hearing him call her President Sue made Sophie's nose sting. On the very day Andrew had so eagerly pushed her out of the company, someone still remembered that she had been the one leading them through every technical breakthrough. I'm doing well, Charlie, Sophie said, steadying her emotions. The baby's doing well too. Charlie was silent for a moment, then said, President Sue. I heard about what happened at the company. Andrew's not even human. Sophie gave a small smile but didn't respond to that. Instead, she got straight to the point. Charlie, that optimization plan you mentioned before, the one that got rejected. Are you still working on it? The StarMap project was the flagship project Andrew always claimed had been created to fulfill Lily's dream. But Charlie's private optimization proposal, one that could boost performance by at least 30%, had been rejected by Andrew for supposedly taking too long. There was a 2-second silence on the line. Then Charlie's voice burst out with stunned excitement. President Sue. You still remember that? Yes. I never gave up on it. I'm convinced that direction is the right one. But Andrew wouldn't listen. All he wanted was a flashy product that could launch quickly, something shiny he could show off to impress Lily, not a truly refined piece of technology that required time and patience. Charlie, Sophie said, if I told you I wanted to restart that project, would you help me? You're starting your own company? Charlie's voice shot up with excitement. Yes, Sophie said firmly. I want to build a product that truly belongs to us, not for anyone else, just for technology and the market. She paused, then laid out the offer. You'll be fully in charge of the technical side of the new company. Your salary will increase by 50% compared to now, and you'll get 10% equity as technical shares. President Sue. Charlie's voice was almost choked with emotion. I'm in. Not even for the money, I just want to prove a point. The company's a mess now. People who only know how to flatter their bosses get promoted, while those of us doing real technical work get pushed aside. I've wanted to leave for a long time. After hanging up, Sophie sat quietly for a long time, unable to calm her emotions. Charlie's reaction gave her tremendous confidence. In the days that followed, Sophie spun like a wound-up top. During the day, she was a new mother, feeding the baby, changing diapers, rocking him to sleep, repeating the cycle again and again. Only late at night, when the house was silent and the baby finally asleep, did she become the old President Sue again. She turned her small pre-marriage apartment into a temporary command center. Charlie, along with 3 trusted engineers, Ben, Mike, and David, formed a secret development team. They worked from their homes during the day and held encrypted online meetings at night. Hannah didn't sit idle either. While helping Sophie organize legal documents, she also used her connections to gather information about what was happening at CloudMap Tech. News kept coming in. To welcome Lily back to the U.S., Andrew spent a fortune hosting a grand reception in Beverly Hills. Many people from the tech circle attended. Lily wore a white evening gown, holding Andrew's arm, smiling gently and gracefully. During the event, Andrew announced that CloudMap Tech would soon release a groundbreaking new product, one that would fulfill Lily's dream. Sophie saw the news notification on her phone and swiped it away without expression. *, a groundbreaking new product? *, it was nothing more than something patched together on the framework she had written years ago. But the next piece of news wasn't nearly as amusing. Andrew seems to have noticed something, Hannah said during a late-night phone call, her tone serious. Today he suddenly went to the tech department and ordered them to hand over all the base source code and backup logs for the StarMap project. He said it was for a security audit. Sophie's heart tightened. Why would he suddenly investigate that? Was it coincidence, or had he heard something? She immediately texted Charlie, pause all offline activities. Move the optimization plan completely underground. Use a brand new architecture and avoid any traceable connection to the old code. Charlie replied quickly. Understood, President Sue. But Sophie knew this was only the beginning. Once Andrew became suspicious, he would dig until he reached the bottom. Sure enough, a few days later, even worse news arrived. David, the engineer responsible for the core module of the star map project, resigned along with his entire team. The reason was simple. In order to release the new version before Lily returned, Andrew had forcibly shortened the testing cycle. The result was a massive vulnerability in the product that nearly caused a loss of customer data. Instead of reflecting on his management decisions, Andrew publicly blamed David at a company meeting, accusing him of incompetence and shifting all the responsibility onto him. Furious, David walked out and took his whole team with him. When Sophie heard the news, she sat in silence for a long time. David was one of the company's veterans, solid technically, straightforward in character. What Andrew had done was no different from cutting off his own arm. This is an opportunity, she told Charlie. Reach out to David privately and see how he's feeling. If he's willing, New Dawn would welcome him. New Dawn, that was the name Sophie had chosen for the new company. It symbolized both the rebirth of technology and the restart of her own life. David's reply came quickly. He had only one question, President Sue, do you still need people over there? And just like that, David and his team quietly joined the New Dawn camp. The days flew by in a blur of tension and hard work. The baby grew a little bigger every day. His features became clearer and clearer, and sometimes he would flash Sophie a toothless smile that melted away all her exhaustion. At last, in the early hours of one morning, New Dawn's first demo was completed. When the full process finally ran successfully on screen for the first time, and they saw those astonishing data processing speeds, the tiny studio erupted in restrained cheers. Charlie's face flushed red with excitement. Ben, Mike, and David were all high-fiving each other in celebration. Hannah didn't understand the technical details, but from the looks on their faces, she knew it was good news, and she was smiling as brightly as anyone. Sophie looked at the New Dawn logo on the screen, overwhelmed with emotion. From being ruthlessly abandoned, to quietly laying her plans, to finally seeing the first real results today, none of it had been easy. But every step had been solid. Just then, her phone screen lit up with another news alert. Cloud Map Tech CEO Andrew announces in high-profile fashion, a grand welcome banquet for renowned designer Lily this Sunday night, where a major partnership project will also be unveiled. The accompanying photo showed Andrew and Lily standing side by side. He looked handsome, she looked graceful. On the surface, they seemed perfectly matched. The atmosphere in the studio instantly went still. Everyone turned to look at Sophie. She turned off her phone screen, lifted her head, and slowly curled her lips into a cold smile. A banquet, she said softly. Perfect. Sunday night. Beverly Hills. A 5-star hotel. Inside the ballroom, glasses clinked and designer outfits shimmered under the lights. Andrew truly had spared no expense for Lily. The guests were all Silicon Valley's rising tech elite, investors, and media reporters. Lily wore a champagne-colored evening gown and moved through the crowd with Andrew's arm linked through hers, smiling with polished elegance. She was unquestionably the star of the night. Andrew was in high spirits, introducing the soon-to-be-released product to several investors when, out of the corner of his eye, he caught sight of the ballroom entrance. His smile froze. Sophie was standing there. She wore a simple black gown, her long hair swept up to reveal the pale line of her neck. She wore no extravagant jewelry, no heavy makeup. She simply stood there, and yet somehow made everything around her fade into the background. Andrew's pupils tightened sharply. Lily noticed his reaction and followed his gaze. The smile on her face dimmed too. Holding a glass of champagne, Sophie walked toward them at an unhurried pace. Her heels clicked crisply against the marble floor, one step at a time, each sound seeming to strike directly against Andrew's chest. Andrew, Sophie said, stopping in front of them with a faint smile, aren't you going to offer me a drink? Andrew's expression darkened. Lowering his voice, he said, Sophie, how did you get in here? You're not welcome. What, your ex-wife can't come share in the celebration? Sophie's gaze moved past him to Lily behind him. Lily, long time no see. Welcome back. Lily forced a weak smile. Sophie, thank you. Andrew shifted to block Sophie's line of sight, his tone edged with warning. What exactly are you trying to do? Nothing much. Sophie swirled the champagne in her hand. Just here to congratulate you. I heard you're launching a new product. Congratulations. At that moment, a middle-aged man happened to pass by. It was Mr. Wang, one of Cloud Map Tech's biggest clients. Sophie immediately raised her voice. Mr. Wang. Hearing his name, Mr. Wang turned. When he saw Sophie, he looked surprised for a second, then broke into a warm smile. Well, if it isn't Sophie. Long time no see. I heard you'd been resting at home lately. Are you fully recovered? Thank you for asking, Mr. Wang. I'm doing much better now, Sophie said with a smile, lightly clinking glasses with him. That's good, Mr. Wang said with feeling. You have no idea, ever since you stepped away, several projects at CloudMap have slowed down. It's had us all worried. Andrew's face darkened even more. He cut in, Mr. Wang, you're joking. The company is operating normally. Mr. Wang laughed awkwardly but didn't respond to Andrew. Instead, he continued speaking to Sophie. Sophie, what are your plans going forward? If you've got any promising projects, don't forget your old friends. That was exactly what she had been waiting for. Sophie smiled faintly, her tone relaxed but confident. I am preparing a new project, actually. It's called New Dawn. We're focused on deep optimization in intelligent data processing and user interaction experience. The first demo is already complete, and the performance data looks quite promising. Compared with similar products currently on the market, efficiency is up by around 30 to 50%. 30 to 50%? Mr. Wang's eyes lit up instantly, and he leaned forward without even realizing it. Sophie, that's incredible. Whenever it's convenient, you absolutely have to let me see it. Of course. Once the project is a little more mature, I'll make sure you're one of the first people I reach out to, Sophie said with a modest smile. Several others nearby were drawn in by the conversation and began asking about New Dawn. Sophie handled every question with ease, speaking confidently and naturally. Andrew stood off to the side, completely shut out. The muscles in his face were pulled tight, and his eyes had turned so dark they looked ready to drip with poison. Lily tugged gently at his sleeve, trying to get him to leave, but he seemed rooted to the spot. As the banquet neared its end, Sophie prepared to leave while she was ahead. But at the corner of the hallway leading to the restroom, Andrew blocked her path. Sophie, he practically hissed through gritted teeth. You did this on purpose. You came here to sabotage me. To bring up that so-called new project on purpose. Sophie stopped walking and turned to look at him calmly. You sent out the invitations. I came. That's entirely proper. As for the new project, Mr. Wang asked, and I answered honestly. Is there a problem? Andrew inhaled sharply, forcing down his anger. You think pulling in a few clients and selling some fantasy is enough to make something happen? We'll see whether it works out soon enough, Sophie said with a faint smile. Andrew, instead of standing here questioning me, maybe you should spend more time worrying about your own company. I hear quite a few core technical staff have left. Is the product timeline still on track? Andrew's face turned ugly. He stepped closer, so close Sophie could smell the alcohol on his breath. Sophie, I'm warning you, don't play with fire. Sophie met his gaze without retreating an inch. Andrew, let me remind you of something too. The moment you handed me those divorce papers, you lost the right to warn me about anything. With that, she stopped looking at him and walked straight past him. The sound of her heels echoed through the empty hallway, steady and powerful. When she stepped out of the hotel, the night breeze brushed against her face with a hint of coolness. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Hannah. How'd it go? Smooth. Sophie was about to reply when another message popped up. It was from Charlie. President Sue, we just got word. After the banquet ended, Andrew urgently contacted multiple investment firms asking about the New Dawn project. And it looks like he started investigating the address of our studio. Sophie's heart sank. He'd reacted that quickly? But worse was still to come. A few afternoons later, Sophie was at home feeding the baby when the doorbell suddenly started ringing frantically. Again and again. Impatient. Aggressive. She looked through the peephole. It was Andrew. He stood outside with a dark expression on his face, and behind him was a man in a suit carrying a briefcase, obviously a lawyer. Sophie placed the baby in the bedroom and made sure the door was closed before opening the front door. Andrew. What do you want? You're not even going to invite me in, he said coldly. That's not convenient. Sophie stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. Whatever it is, you can say it here. Andrew snorted. He took a document from the lawyer standing behind him and held it out. Sophie, I'd like a reasonable explanation. Sophie took the papers and began flipping through them. Inside were printed screenshots of emails and technical comparison charts. The report compared early concept diagrams from the New Dawn project with CloudMap Tech's existing technology. Certain sections were highlighted in red, marking supposed similarities. The conclusion clearly suggested that New Dawn had stolen trade secrets. An explanation? Sophie closed the folder. Explain what exactly? Explain how you managed to develop a project so similar to Cloud Map's core technology in such a short time. Andrew's voice trembled with suppressed anger. Sophie, I never expected you to stoop this low. Wasn't the property you got in the divorce enough? Did you really have to steal my company's trade secrets? Your company's trade secrets? Sophie repeated, as if hearing the world's funniest joke. Andrew, have you forgotten who built the original core framework of Cloud Map? How many of those so-called secrets came from my own hands? I'm simply taking what was originally mine and improving it. Since when does that count as theft? That's nonsense. Andrew snapped. You signed a confidentiality agreement and a non-compete agreement when you left the company. What you're doing now violates both. I can sue you. The lawyer behind him spoke at the perfect moment, his tone formal. Ms. Sue, according to the agreement, you may not engage in work that competes with Cloud Map Tech's core business within 1 year of leaving the company. Your New Dawn project overlaps heavily with Cloud Map's primary business, which constitutes a violation of the non-compete clause. Mr. Andrew has the legal right to demand that you cease the project and compensate for damages. Sophie listened to the two of them playing their rehearsed roles, her heart growing colder. So he really had chosen this tactic. A non-compete clause. She tilted her head slightly and looked at Andrew. Andrew, are you forgetting something? When I left the company, you forced me out unilaterally. And if I remember correctly, you never paid the required non-compete compensation after my departure, did you? Andrew's expression shifted slightly. Hannah had already reviewed the agreement and Sophie's bank records. Andrew hadn't paid a single dollar. Without compensation, the non-compete clause carried little legal weight. The lawyer clearly knew this as well. He paused briefly before continuing. The issue of compensation can be negotiated later. However, your current project still poses a potential threat to Cloud Map. A potential threat? Sophie cut him off and turned her gaze back to Andrew. Andrew, I think you've misunderstood something. The threat to Cloud Map has never been me, and it certainly isn't New Dawn. She stepped forward, staring straight at him. It's your own arrogance that drove away the core engineers. It's your obsession with quick results that ignored the company's long-term development. And it's the fact that your mind is so consumed with Lily that you stopped caring about the company at all. You're talking nonsense, Andrew shouted, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Am I? Sophie said calmly. Then why did David leave with his entire team? Why is the Star Map project full of bugs? Are those my fault too? Andrew had no answer. His face shifted from pale to flushed. The tension in the hallway became almost tangible. Looking at his furious yet helpless expression, Sophie felt no satisfaction, only a deep sense of exhaustion and absurdity. Andrew, if you came here today with this flimsy report and a non-compete agreement you never even paid for, then congratulations. You've made your point. I know you're desperate. She pushed the folder back into his hands. You can leave now. Andrew stared at her, his eyes complicated. He took a deep breath, as if making up his mind about something. His voice dropped lower, cold, deliberate, threatening. Sophie, don't push me. If I expose the fact that you secretly contacted Charlie and stole the company's technical secrets, what do you think will happen? In this industry, who will still work with you? Who will trust a woman who stole technology from her ex-husband's company? Sophie's heart sank. He really did know about Charlie. He had investigated more deeply than she expected. Noticing the subtle change in her expression, Andrew seemed to regain a bit of confidence. I'll give you one last chance for old time's sake. Shut down the New Dawn project and sign this statement promising you'll never enter this field again. Otherwise, I won't just sue you. I'll ruin your reputation so thoroughly that you'll never work in this industry again. With that, he gave her one last long look, turned around, and left with the lawyer. The hallway fell silent. Only Sophie remained. A cold fear slowly crept up her spine. He knew about Charlie. What else might he know? If he decided to spread accusations recklessly, even if she eventually won the lawsuit, a startup's reputation could easily collapse under that kind of scandal. She leaned against the door, her hands and feet suddenly cold. Just then, her phone rang. It was Hannah. Juan, did Andrew come to see you? Don't be afraid. If he wants to sue, we'll fight him. And I just got some crucial evidence, solid proof about the assets he transferred and some tax issues. If he wants to play hardball, we'll play. Sophie tightened her grip on the phone. Hannah's words felt like an adrenaline shot. Andrew, you really think that's enough to scare me? A few days later, Sophie and Hannah received a court summons. Andrew had officially filed a lawsuit against Sophie, accusing her of violating the non-compete agreement and stealing commercial trade secrets. The news spread quickly through the tech circle. Former spouses battling each other in court, especially over sensitive technical matters, sparked endless speculation and rumors. Many people began watching from the sidelines. Some potential clients who had shown interest in New Dawn started to hesitate. The pressure was immense. On the day of the hearing, Sophie put on a sharp gray suit and pinned her hair back neatly. The woman in the mirror looked calm and determined, without a trace of fear. Hannah, acting as her attorney, walked into the courthouse beside her. At the entrance, they ran into Andrew and his legal team. He looked at Sophie with a complicated expression, as if searching her face for any sign of panic. But Sophie simply walked past him calmly, as if he were nothing more than a stranger. The trial began. Andrew's lawyer launched the first attack, describing how Sophie had allegedly used her position as Andrew's former wife to access company secrets, and how she had quickly assembled a team to develop a competing product after leaving the company. He presented carefully edited comparison documents implying that New Dawn's technology resembled cloud maps. When it was their turn to respond, Hannah rose calmly. She first pointed out that the non-compete agreement's validity was questionable because Andrew had never paid the required compensation. She presented Sophie's bank records as evidence in court. Then she addressed the most serious accusation, the alleged theft of trade secrets. Your Honor, Hannah said clearly and firmly, the claim that my client stole trade secrets is completely baseless. In fact, the original ideas and foundational framework behind Cloud Map's core technology came from my client, Ms. Sophie. She submitted Sophie's preserved technical manuscripts, early design drafts from her university graduation project, along with later versions of the framework she had developed. Expert analysis confirmed that these materials predated Cloud Map Tech's founding. And as for the New Dawn project developed after my client left the company, Hannah continued, it uses an entirely new technical architecture and algorithm model. This conclusion is supported by a full independent analysis from a third-party authority. She presented a thick evaluation report that compared the two codebases in detail. The conclusion was clear. The implementation methods were completely different, with no evidence of copying. As for the continuation of certain technical ideas, Hannah added, glancing at Andrew with a hint of sarcasm, my client simply improved upon her own original concepts. Are we now saying that someone improving their own ideas counts as theft? Under Hannah's methodical rebuttal and strong evidence chain, the so-called proof presented by Andrew's lawyers quickly began to crumble. The momentum in the courtroom had completely shifted to Sophie's side. What caught Andrew completely off guard was what Hannah did next. At the very end, she suddenly submitted another piece of evidence. Your Honor, we would also like to file a counterclaim against Mr. Andrew for false accusation and commercial defamation, Hannah announced clearly. Furthermore, we have reason to believe that this lawsuit was filed to cover up serious internal management problems within his own company. She presented partial evidence showing Andrew's transfer of marital assets, along with backup financial records revealing questionable accounting practices he had ordered his finance department to carry out. The very files Sophie had kept on her USB drive. Although these materials were not directly related to the current case, the timing and implications instantly shifted the atmosphere in the courtroom. The judge's expression grew serious. Andrew's legal team visibly panicked, whispering urgently among themselves. Andrew himself turned pale. He stared at the documents Hannah had produced in disbelief. The company he thought he fully controlled, the behind-the-scenes dealings he believed no one knew about, had just been laid bare in open court. These documents were obtained illegally. Andrew's lawyer protested, forcing himself to stay composed. Hannah had already anticipated this. These financial backups were legally accessed and preserved by my client before her departure, as part of her professional responsibilities. If the opposing party doubts their authenticity, they are welcome to request an official verification. In the end, the judge announced a recess and said the final verdict would be issued at a later date. But everyone in the room already knew how this would end. When they stepped outside the courthouse, the sunlight felt almost blinding. Andrew hurried after Sophie and stopped her. The calm arrogance he once carried was gone. In its place was exhaustion, and a deep confusion he could not hide. Those financial records, how did you? He asked hoarsely. Sophie stopped and looked at him calmly. Andrew, did you forget? The company firewall password was our wedding anniversary. His pupils shrank instantly. The color drained from his face. While he had long since forgotten those shared anniversaries, the carelessness he left behind had quietly become the blade that now cut him down. Sophie, did you really have to go this far? He murmured. Far? Sophie repeated softly, finding the word almost laughable. Andrew, the moment you handed me those divorce papers outside the postpartum center, and the moment you tried to destroy me and New Dawn with fabricated accusations, you lost the right to say that. She turned and walked toward Hannah's car. Behind her, Andrew's lawyer's voice suddenly rang out in panic. Mr. Andrew, there's a problem. We just received news. Ms. Lily heard about the court hearing and booked the earliest flight back to New York. Sophie didn't turn around. Inside the car, Hannah pumped her fist excitedly. We won. We actually won. Let's see how arrogant Andrew can be now. Sophie leaned back in the seat and let out a long breath. The hardest battle was finally over. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Charlie. President Sue, we heard the court results. This is amazing. A few investors who were hesitating just contacted us. Looking out the window at the city rushing past, Sophie knew something clearly. The era of her and New Dawn had only just begun. The victory in court acted like a starting gun. New Dawn emerged fully into the open. Investors who had been watching from the sidelines began reaching out. Client inquiries surged. Sophie and her team barely had time to breathe, registering the company officially, leasing a larger office space, hiring new employees. Every day felt like a battle. But it was a battle full of hope. Meanwhile, Sophie occasionally heard news about Andrew through various channels. After losing the case, he was forced to cover the legal costs and soon faced investigations from regulatory authorities due to the tax and financial issues exposed during the trial. Cloudmap Tech's stock price plunged. Panic spread throughout the company, and several remaining senior executives resigned. The once glorious company was collapsing. But his career wasn't the only thing falling apart. His so-called love story collapsed even faster. On the same day the trial results became public, Lily flew back to New York without even seeing him. Rumor had it she sent Andrew a single text message at the airport. Asterisk, this is where we end. Asterisk, Andrew called countless times and sent dozens of messages. None were answered. Lily blocked him on all social media. When Sophie heard about it, she was feeding her baby. She simply said, oh, without any other reaction. That man, and that chapter of her life, no longer had anything to do with her. Several months later, one evening, Sophie finished work early and took her baby for a walk in a nearby park. The child was now over a year old and curious about everything, babbling happily while pointing at flowers and birds along the path. The sunset was beautiful, golden light spilling across the grass. Sophie felt peaceful. Then she saw someone. Andrew. He sat alone on a park bench, wearing a wrinkled hoodie. A rough stubble covered his chin. His eyes stared blankly ahead. He looked much thinner, wrapped in a heavy cloud of defeat, nothing like the confident CEO he once was. Sophie intended to steer the stroller around him. But as if sensing her presence, Andrew suddenly turned his head. His gaze locked onto her instantly. At first his expression was blank. Then recognition dawned, and his eyes filled with tangled emotions, embarrassment, resentment, regret, and a trace of desperate hope. He stood up and staggered slightly as he walked toward her. Sophie didn't move. She simply watched him approach. Sophie, he said, his voice hoarse. Yes? Her tone was distant and calm. The way she addressed him made his face twitch. He forced a smile that looked worse than crying. So now you're calling me by my full name? Do things between us really have to be like this? What else would they be? Sophie asked. What relationship do we even have anymore? He was speechless for a moment. After taking several breaths, he spoke again, as if gathering courage. Sophie, I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way. I shouldn't have listened to Lily, and I definitely shouldn't have forced you out of the company like that. Lily, she's gone. She never loved me. She just. Now I have nothing. The company is finished, she left me. Sophie, I know you hate me, but for the sake of the child, could you give me another chance? As he spoke, tears actually rolled down his face. He looked like a lost child with nowhere left to go. Once upon a time, seeing him like this might have softened Sophie's heart. But now she felt nothing except a cold sense of absurdity. A second chance, she repeated softly. Looking at his tear-streaked face, she said calmly, Andrew, have you forgotten how confidently you stood in court promising to ruin my reputation? I was confused. I was desperate, he insisted quickly. It was Lily. She kept speaking badly about you in front of me, she pushed me into it. That's enough. Sophie's voice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably firm. Even now, you're still blaming someone else? Andrew, you were blinded by greed. You chose betrayal. You chose to hurt people. Whatever Lily did was never an excuse. His crying stopped instantly. His face looked hollow. As for the child, Sophie continued calmly, His father died the moment he chose another woman over the mother who had just given birth to him. She didn't look at his suddenly pale face again. She turned and pushed the stroller away. After a few steps, she could still hear his muffled sobs behind her, like the cries of a trapped animal. She never looked back. 1 year later. San Francisco. Moscone Center. The global launch event for New Dawn technology. Backstage, Sophie stood before a mirror. She wore a crisp white business suit that made her look radiant. Her hair was tied neatly up, revealing a smooth forehead and confident eyes. Those eyes held both the calm that comes after storms and the sharp determination of an entrepreneur. Hannah adjusted Sophie's collar, her eyes slightly red. "Our Sophie looks amazing," she said softly. "Better than ever." Charlie, Ben, Mike, and David were all there too, dressed in sharp suits, standing off to the side, nervous and excited. Over the past year, they had worked like machines, pouring everything they had into New Dawn. They had solved countless technical challenges, traveled everywhere meeting potential clients, and now they had finally arrived at this moment. "Ready, President Sue?" Charlie asked, unable to hide the excitement in his voice. Sophie took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's go." The stage lights focused on her. The audience was packed with industry professionals, investors, and journalists. Sophie recognized many familiar faces, including Mr. Wang from Andrew's banquet. He smiled and nodded at her from the crowd. She walked to the center of the stage, adjusted the microphone, and calmly swept her gaze across the room. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Sophie, founder and CEO of New Dawn Technology." Her speech wasn't filled with flashy language. Instead, she presented solid data and clear logic, explaining how the New Dawn platform, with its advanced design and powerful performance, solved major industry pain points and delivered a true leap in efficiency. Gasps of surprise and bursts of applause echoed through the room. When the big screen displayed a performance comparison between New Dawn and the industry's leading products, the atmosphere in the hall reached a climax. "We believe the purpose of technology is to create a better future, not to cling to someone's illusion of a dream, and certainly not to exist as anyone's accessory." Her voice carried clearly through the microphone. At the end, she paused. Her expression softened. "Over the past 2 years, I've been through a lot. People often ask me whether I feel wronged, whether I think life has been unfair." The room grew very quiet. "I want to say this, every step in life, whether smooth or difficult, is valuable. Those experiences helped me understand myself better. They also taught me something important. A woman's first responsibility is to live for herself." She lifted her head, a confident and radiant smile spreading across her face. "Your worth should never be defined by anyone else. And your dreams should always be built by your own hands. That's why I named this company New Dawn. It represents not only the rebirth of technology, but also the truth that every one of us has the power to leave the past behind and begin a stronger, brand new chapter in our lives. To live for yourself is to claim your crown." "Thank you." Thunderous applause filled the hall. Sophie looked at the faces in the audience, faces inspired by her words, and at the proud, emotional expressions of her team. For the first time in a long while, she felt both deep peace and profound accomplishment. After the launch event, she declined the celebratory dinner and returned home alone to her new house in Palo Alto. Yes, she had moved. She had left the small apartment she bought before marriage and moved into this new place. It wasn't large, but it had a small yard where her son could run and play. Her son was now over 2 years old. He sat on the living room floor building a tower of blocks. When the nanny saw Sophie come in, the little boy ran over excitedly, holding up a crooked block castle. "Mommy, look." Sophie crouched down and studied the wobbly tower that could collapse at any moment. "That's amazing, sweetheart," she said with a smile. The little boy grinned, revealing a row of tiny teeth. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Hannah. "Juan, did you see the news?" Below the message was a link. Sophie tapped it open. It was a report about CloudMap Tech entering bankruptcy liquidation. The final paragraph mentioned that its founder, Andrew, was currently missing and rumored to have left California. Sophie finished reading and quietly turned off the screen. The love, the resentment, the betrayal, everything that once felt so overwhelming now seemed distant and blurred. None of it stirred her heart anymore. Her future belonged to her. She walked to the window and looked out into the night. San Francisco glittered in the distance, the city lights shining like thousands of stars. Her reflection appeared in the glass, clear and steady, with a calm, confident smile. Just then, the doorbell rang. The nanny went to answer it and came back holding a bouquet. "Ms. Sue, someone sent you flowers." It was a bouquet of sunflowers, bright, vibrant, full of life. Sophie took the flowers and opened the card attached. There was only one line written in strong, confident handwriting: wonderful speech. Looking forward to working together. Michael ***. Michael was the head of one of the country's top investment firms. They had spoken briefly at the launch event earlier that day and made a good impression on each other. Sophie smiled slightly as she read the card. She placed the flowers on the coffee table and returned to the window. The night breeze was gentle. The stars were bright. The road ahead was still long. But the path beneath her feet was already full of light. And that's the end of today's story. Sophie's journey reminds me of a quote: "The best revenge isn't destroying each other, it's when someone tries to bury you in the mud, and you rise from that mud and bloom into a flower." Andrew believed that by taking the company, he could finally fulfill Lily's dream. What he didn't realize was that the company itself was just a shell. The true soul of it had always been in Sophie's hands. What he threw away was the very thing that could have saved him. And Sophie, after being abandoned, didn't fall apart. She didn't drown in resentment or self-pity. Instead, she planned carefully, moved forward steadily, and ultimately became the queen of her own life. So if you're going through a low point in your marriage, or if you've just walked away from a painful relationship, remember Sophie's story. Your worth does not need anyone else's approval. And your dreams deserve to be built by your own hands. Thank you for watching Marriage is Not the End. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.